All right, hello and welcome to today's quarterly security webinar, Fraud is Rampant, 6 Key Principles for Security. We ask that anyone who has dialed in please mute your microphone in order to eliminate any background noise during the presentation. This webinar will consist of a 50-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Please feel free to post questions in the chat box throughout the webinar and we'll either answer them as you ask or in the Q&A session. If we do not get to your question, someone from our team will follow up with you. Today's webinar is eligible for CTP and FP&A recertification credits. The credit form, a copy of the deck, and the recording will be sent via email in the next 7 business days. Today's presentation will be given by Craig Jeffrey of Strategic Treasurer. Craig Jeffrey formed Strategic Treasurer in 2004 to provide corporate, educational, and government entities direct access to comprehensive and current assistance with their treasury and financial process needs. His 25-plus years of financial and treasury experience as a practitioner, banker, and as a consultant have uniquely qualified him to help organizations craft realistic goals and achieve significant benefits quickly. He is responsible for overall relationship management and ensuring total client satisfaction on all projects. Welcome, Craig. I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Meredith. Welcome everybody. Good day. This is our first webinar of 2018, so glad you could join us for it. And a great topic is certainly one about security, because security is a significant issue. And just by way of background, as we look at the agenda for today's discussion, I think the broader context as we look at security is that the payoff for criminals is massive. Criminals are also adapting, and they're using technology against you. So this means that we must up our game. And part of that means taking in a different tact or an additional tact. I think most people are familiar and have heard about different security frameworks. And security frameworks are great, whether you're looking at SWIFT, a customer security program, and the framework they have, or some of the other IT-oriented frameworks. These are excellent. But we also wanted to take a different tack by looking at some of the principles that cut across these frameworks that may help us think about our approaches and the environment a little bit differently. That's really the focus of today. 6 of the 12 key principles for security, we're going to focus on 6 of these. And you may be familiar with things like segregation of duties, dual control, out-of-band authentication. But we want to build on some other key principles that may be new, or maybe you thought of those in some different ways. So let's go through our agenda. We are going to set the stage, talk about that extensiveness of fraud. Not too long, but we will talk about that. We'll discuss and cover some of the trends that are occurring. All this is to prepare us for going through 6 of the security principles. And the first 6 we refer to as secure, and they cover speed matters, the ability to respond quickly to incidents, either attempts or actual fraud, is very important. And I think, it's always better to have prevented fraud, but when fraud or hacks or challenges exist, the speed that we respond makes a very, very significant difference. Second is encryption and control of keys. This is from the physical world as well as from a system perspective. How do we lock down the data so that it's not easily seen, whether you're talking about encryption in a digital sense where everything is scrambled or encoded, whether you're replacing that with other codes or information or tokens, is an element related to encryption and control of keys principle. The third is challenge and verify. And this has relevance to treasury professionals, financial professionals, as well as IT professionals in the digital realm, as well as the physical environment. The fourth is update continuously. Updating systems continuously seems to be commonly understood by our IT brethren and sistren, if those are words, and it is also important that we update the software that's between our ears and those that are in treasury and finance, that we make sure we are staying current with different attack vectors that criminals are using, how they're trying to penetrate our system, and also how they're constantly monitoring and leveraging technology. So there's several elements of update continuously that we'll touch on today. Readiness and response. This is being ready for situations and being able to respond appropriately to any type of situation. And there are some cutovers and ties to response and timeliness of response that bleeds back over into speed matters. So these principles have some nice overlapping sections to them. And the E for exact and specific accountability and management for a number of things, that we have direct accountability as opposed to everyone's responsible for something, that we'll see how that specific accountability, that exact accountability and management can aid in our fight against fraud and crime against our organizations or against our personal data as well. So that makes up the secure. We're going to get into final thoughts and summarizing what we discussed today, and then we're going to look at and encourage you to take some of the surveys that we have active. And I'll make a compelling case for why you should take the surveys beyond just helping the overall treasury industry and finance area understand what's going on, but also because there's more in it for you. You'll get more data, more information if you complete these surveys. They're long. They take time, but quite a bit less time than a webinar like this one takes. And then at the end, if we haven't covered them during the session, we will cover questions and answers at the end. Happy to do that. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So again, thank you for joining, and we'll continue through the webinar with the setting the stage portion. So on the left-hand side, you can see some numbers. In our 2017 survey last year, 86% of respondents in that survey, and N was greater than 300, 86% were found to have experienced either payment fraud, cyber fraud, business email compromise, or imposter fraud, whatever term you like to use for that, or ransomware attacks within the past 2 years. With the growth of ransomware and some of these others, these numbers are hitting every organization. People who are responding are recognizing that organizations are being hit, and a very significant number of organizations have lost money from that, lost money through time and effort to respond to these, or actually lost money because they sent money out, money was pilfered or sent out from their organization by either changing records or using their payment systems to send it out. And the last point on here, we found that only 13%, which, as you know, is about 1 out of 7, 1 out of 8 organizations, had a formal, current, and well-understood treasury fraud and controls framework. Now, organizations might have had an IT framework, might have had some other types of framework. Maybe they're using PCI. But a very small number had something that was formal, current, and well communicated and well understood. That creates a challenge. So while we're on that, let's do our first polling question. We have several polling questions sprinkled throughout just to gauge who's on the line and what those responses are. So how is your security framework defined? We're just asking this question in a different way. The first is that our framework is written, so it's formal, and it's reviewed at least annually. We meet on a topic quarterly. We do not have a defined security framework, and our framework is more informal. And I don't know if we have a defined security framework, which those last two sort of fall into the same bucket. So if you'd go ahead and answer those, that would be great, just to see who's on the line, how advanced this group is compared to perhaps the population at large. So we'll wait just for a moment on that. And again, thank you for taking everyone taking the time to answer these polling questions. All right, let's give it a few more moments. Okay, so you can continue to answer. I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results. So it looks like we have a set of overachievers, so congratulations. You have a formal written framework. It's reviewed annually, but also notice that a lot of your peers in the organization, that's very informal. We don't know if we have a defined security framework. That's 22%. More than 1 in 5, almost 1 in 4 don't have it, or we don't have a defined framework. It's more informal. I don't know. So that's 20, 30, fully 30% don't, or just about 30% don't. 20, 30, 39. My math is not working today. It's about 40% don't have something that's formal, and it looks like about 60% are very much the overachievers. So 60 to 40. This is a very advanced crowd. That's excellent. So we're going to move that to the side. Again, thank you everyone for taking that poll, and let's continue on. So these are the 12 security principles that we talk about. We call it secure clamps, just based on the letters that the words start with. We're covering and focusing on the first 6: speed matters, encryption, and control of keys, down to the middle of exact and specific accountability and management. Now let's look at where are we attacked from, setting the stage, sources of fraud, external non-employees for when you can identify it, 4 out of 81%, it's listed there, a huge chunk of it. And then if we go to unknown source, there's a little bit of an overlap because sometimes they're identified multiple locations or multiple locations for that. The smallest that they're able to identify now tends to be external and formal employees. But we have current employees, former external non-employees, external former employees, and then quite a few organizations, 1 in 5, have an unknown source. What's the breakdown of fraud experience? About 7% had experienced ransomware attacks. This is fairly new, the last couple of years. Quite a pain having your computer or your server locked up. And then when we look at the different types of cyber fraud, payment fraud, business email compromise, we see that business email compromise scaling up to 76% of organizations experiencing it. This is very prevalent. Organizations sometimes experience dozens of attacks and attempts at business email compromise, sending and receiving emails that look like they're from an executive, the CEO, the CFO, and they're asking you to send out payments very rapidly, trying to encourage you to do that. So quite a range of options there on the fraud experience of what your peers are seeing. So we'll jump over to the criminal playbook as we talk about speed matters. And the concept of speed matters is really how fast you respond makes a significant difference on how bad the loss is to your company, or if there is a loss, and how quick you can shut it down. Now, it is more desirable not to be hacked, not to have money leave your organization, but when that happens, your ability to respond quickly and appropriately makes a tremendous difference. So we're going to go through a couple examples in just a few moments, but let me just talk about the criminal playbook, because if you understand the mind of the criminal, you'll understand better why speed matters, and your readiness and ability to respond quickly will make a significant difference and has made a significant difference in some organizations. So let's think about that for a moment. So the first element of the criminal playbook, and we have slides and information on that if you're looking for more data. The first intent and method is if they can steal money from you directly, if they can control the sending of money out of your accounts to accounts that they control, and then can then disperse it further, take it out of the banking system to wherever they use their money, they will do that. That's the number one option. If they can send money out on their control, that's number one. Number two is things, is the concept of getting you to send money. This might be, a business email compromise, sending you emails, encouraging you to do that, send out a wire. It might be striking up a conversation so you think you're dealing with one of your key vendors if you're the head of AP, and eventually they say, hey, we're using new banking stuff. Please send our future payments to this address. We're closing the other one tomorrow. Go ahead and do that. And so they've convinced you to change vendor master records. They've convinced you to send money out in a particular way. That's number two, getting you to send money. Three is stealing data they can sell. This is common. There's many, many examples of organizations or crime rings stealing data, and then it's available on the dark web, depending on whether it's medical information, banking information, credit card information. They're trying to sell it. So they're stealing sensitive data, trying to sell it as best they can. The fourth tends to be a little less sophisticated, but if I can't get that data, can't do that, but I can get you to open up emails, maybe use a program or a website that I can load some harmful software that will encrypt your hard drive or will spread throughout the network or attack your network servers. They can lock those up. Sometimes they're monitoring what goes on. They'll also delete your backups if they're attached physically, and then encourage you to pay using Bitcoin. And you don't want that to be your first use of Bitcoin, or understand what Bitcoin is, that it's going to be untraceable. So that is their playbook. Steal money directly. 1, 2, get you to send money. 3, steal data that they can be sold. And 4, lock up your data and charge you for it. So that's the criminal playbook. And when they do that, if they steal the money or get you to send money, they want to hide evidence so that you don't notice that you had money stolen, that it's delayed. And the delayed discovery means they have more time to take the money out of the banking system or move it to other accounts they control until it's not traceable. So the speed that you respond matters very significantly. So what are some preventative techniques? So things like we reconcile accounts regularly. We do them on an automated daily basis. We have a treasury proof, which is Treasury looks to see what are our balances. Do they line up with what our expected cash forecast is? Are these done in a way that would spit out variances and irregularities, both in terms of significant amounts, but do you have a process that will identify even small changes and research those? So if I'm trying to steal I've gained control of some companies' ability to debit an account via an ACH transaction. Maybe I send something in for a penny or two, and then I also send a credit in for the same amount. That way, when the reconciliation person goes to look at them, they see, oh, this is probably a error on the bank side, or the bank's charging fees, or whatever goes on. I'll let it slide because there's no reconciliation problem here. It was an in and out. I can wipe those things off together. We're good. Well, that might be a surveillance. They're checking to see if this is an active account. This account's live. It doesn't have positive pay or electronic pre-authorization, electronic equivalent. Okay, now we can up the game. Well, we've determined that it's open. Let's see how much we can get and how quickly they'll be able to detect it. So all of these items, how you do reconciliation, knowing what to look for, whether you're a Treasury employee, whether you have people in AP, accounts receivable, human resources, et cetera, even IT, having that understanding is one of the key preventative techniques. Performing reconciliations is another. Those are a few key items. But let's see how speedy everyone is. We'll take our second polling question. For speediness, this is Speed Matters. If we can change this poll, actually, if we can change it so it's an answer all that apply, let's pull it off and change that. I forgot to indicate that this is a poll everyone that applies. If we can change that. My error, first webinar of the year, and first major polling question error, so sorry about that. So I guess we'll make a new one. We'll pull it up in just a bit, but I'm going to move on to the next slide. Same topic, so we're talking about speed matters. Why does it matter if you respond more quickly? And we gave you the example of if I can move money out of your accounts or get you to send money out of your accounts, I still need to get it out of the banking system. So if I can send it to an account I control, it doesn't have to be my account. If I control it somewhere else, I can then move it somewhere else and pull it out of the banking system through cash transfers, moving them other ways, taking them out through casinos, some other examples. I'm going to give you a quick overview of these two banks. In February, just about 2 years ago, the Central Bank of Bangladesh had a very major hack. $951 million worth of messages were sent. Messages to send money were sent through the SWIFT network. Someone had hacked the central bank's system and network, obviously monitored what they were doing for some long period of time. They had weaknesses. Their defense looked more like Swiss cheese than maybe cheddar. Lots of holes. $951 million worth of messages were sent. $101 million was actually moved. $101 million of funds were moved, and the others were blocked due to the New York Fed, which is where they had their money at. Some of the anti-money laundering triggers were flagged, and it blocked the additional transfers. $20 million was recovered because someone couldn't spell. They spelled foundation, which is not necessarily a good defense. It's not a good policy to hope that criminals didn't pay attention in spelling or grammar or anything else. But they noticed that. So $20 million was frozen at another bank in another country and then eventually returned. But they lost $81 million. The criminals were very good about blocking how they would get notified. They installed some programs that would delete messages, PDF files coming back confirming transfers. So when those confirming messages came back from their system, they would get deleted. They wouldn't show up on the screen. They wouldn't print on the printer. And so they were oblivious to these transactions. That allowed the criminals more time to remove the money from the banking system, pulling it out or exfiltrating out the money through casinos in some different locations. So they maximized the amount of time they had. The Central Bank of Bangladesh couldn't respond quickly, and they suffered an $81 million net loss. That is, by anyone's measure, a significant loss, quite terrible, and it raised the awareness. That and other incidents raised the awareness of many in Treasury, certainly in SWIFT in terms of requiring everyone to harden their endpoints. That's why they implemented the SWIFT customer security program, a mandatory self-attestation process. So that was slow, was not good. Now, a couple months ago in October 2017, the International Bank in Taiwan was hacked. They were breached. $60 million was sent out from their bank accounts. And they had quite a bit of the same type of situation and attempts and hacks that the Central Bank of Bangladesh had. We don't have as much information on that. But they were able to respond more quickly. They recognized that there were transactions that were happening. They had implemented some of the components of the SWIFT CSP framework, and they were able to respond quickly, which led to funds being frozen in the banking system until they were able to prove that that shouldn't have been sent out. Funds were returned, and they got back over $59 million out of the $60 million that had been sent from their organization. So less than a $1 million net loss seems significantly better than an $81 million net loss. So the ability to recover and respond rapidly to a situation makes a difference. This is a good example of what can go on. Now I think our poll is ready, and we're going to slide that back over and see it's a square box, which means you can answer more than one. So this is speediness. How speedy are you? So you can answer more than one. Do you reconcile your bank automatically? Your bank account, your bank reconciliation is done automatically, and we assume that means automatically on a daily basis. 2 is we perform a cash proof on a daily basis. This is Treasury, comparing our balances to what we expected to have happened at the end of the day from our prior day cash positioning, and we understand what those differences are. Is it a timing difference? Did something fail? Or has something fraudulent happened? 3rd is we have an action list, an action plan to respond to issues. The list is such that we know who to call, when to call, what the numbers are. And it's not just stored on a computer that may have had ransomware installed on it. The next one is we have improved our staff readiness and ability to respond in the past year. We've done something significant to make sure everyone's ready and able to respond. And the last one is we would guess we're about average in terms of speed. Now maybe you've answered none of the above ones there, but you think you're about even with your peers. Maybe not. So love to see where people are, and so go ahead and keep answering, and you can answer more than one section. We're going to show the results. Now, there's a few things here that we can look at. So top is we perform cash proof daily. This is a group of treasury people. That's excellent. Someone's checking to make sure those are right. That's about 2/3. About 6 and 10 reconcile bank balances on an automatic basis. This is excellent. Data is coming in electronically. It's matched electronically. You're able to see any differences within one day. That is great. The next question you might ask your team is, what about small amounts that might show the testing? What about protecting the accounts with some of the bank services that exist? Banks bring those up, not just because they can make a few pennies on a transaction, but they can block and look at and see filters and provide greater protection to your accounts. The third is we have an action list to respond to issues. This is we have a plan. It says who to call, where to call, how do we escalate things. This is interesting because we're still less than 4 in 10. More than a third of people have an action plan to respond to issues. This looks like the biggest area, or one of the biggest areas of growth. We need to get those numbers up higher so we can respond quickly. And about a third of organizations improved staff readiness and ability to respond in the past year. Took significant and direct steps to make sure people are ready and able to respond. They can detect issues, they can recognize patterns, attack vectors, etc. And about a little less than a third say we're about average in terms of speed. I'd love to see who thinks they're behind and who thinks they're ahead. That's always interesting, but that will be for a poll in the future or a survey. So thank you, everyone, for answering that. This is quite useful to see how this is spread out. So we're going to move that to the side, and we're going to continue our dialogue. So S was for speed. Speed matters. Now the E in secure is encryption and control of keys. And I think what we want to think about is, how do we encrypt data? Why do we encrypt data? So that if someone somehow gains access to the system, they're still looking at data that is encrypted, which doesn't mean as much. If I pull it out, I have to decrypt it. So it's the assumption that it might be easier to get into a system, but then I have another layer of protection that's encrypted. And this is protecting your encryption keys, protecting your physical keys, some of those elements there that are important. So those who are familiar with the automated clearinghouse, your direct deposit of payroll is an example of an ACH transaction that runs through the automated clearinghouse. Those organizations with a tremendous number of payments, maybe an insurance company with a lot of debits, everyone. There was an RFI out recently, and there's significant discussion about tokenizing some of the bank account information, using a token instead of just the number or instead of just encrypting the number. So putting something else there where a token is stored in place of a number. So if someone steals it and unencrypts something, it's still a token. It doesn't give you the exact information that you would need to attack. So that's the general principle of I want to encrypt, I want to tokenize, so that if someone does get to the data, it's not useful to them. And I don't think we're going to spend time talking about the two types of encryption. One is symmetric. I guess I'll talk about it really briefly. Symmetric is we use the same key to encrypt and decrypt. We have to obviously protect the keys very strongly in that case so that they're not taken or we have to change them. Asymmetric is there's a different decryption and unencryption key so that you can pass data. You allow someone to encrypt it that only you will be able to decrypt it. So there's different elements. IT cares about that. It's just useful to know that there are different types of encryption for the digital world. And if we continue on, keeping this data secure and not seeable, right? You don't provide access to secure information, but you also want to make sure that you can do that by encryption, codes, et cetera, but also by not doing things that are foolish. These practices can exist. So at the top, don't put passwords on the bottom of keyboards. Everyone sort of chuckles, and everyone says, we don't put it on the bottom of keyboards. We stick it on the screen, but we put it next to, we make it look like a fake number that we call, or it is on the bottom. It's a yellow sticky note. Oh, that's a problem. We put it on tape. We bury it in a steno pad. These are way too easy to get a hold of. Someone could find them quickly. Someone who doesn't work in your area could see you accessing that and use that. So it's just making it so you've defeated the idea of a digital key, digital password, because you've made it available. Same thing, you're exiting the door, you see someone saying, I'm going to go for a break, and I don't want to have to go walk around the building, so I stick a card, a piece of wood in the door, and then I'm taking my break. They forget that, they leave it there, and there's a significant problem. So those are some of the elements that, if we're not wise, it will creep in. It will creep in. If you go around and check your area, look on the bottom of keyboards, in the top of drawers, you'll oftentimes find some passwords for common devices. It's rather scary. We see that all the time going to companies. Enforced compliance, a couple points there. One, multi-factor authentication. That adds another layer of security. So you have a password and maybe a token that changes. So someone has to have your password, which may not have been protected as well. And they also have to have your token or some other element. So multiple factors, 2-factor or 3 or more factors can also help. The last point there is enforce the length and strength of passwords. Shorter passwords can be forced open much more easily, even if they're complex. So length of a password, 15 digits, I think is what the FBI has said what they like. It could be a combination of phrases, and strong passwords together are the best way to go. They need to be changed at a regular or systematic basis, and you can decide whether you think 30 days is a little too much, will cause you to make the changes too simple, or whether 90 days makes sense. That your organization probably has some standard for that, but some systematic way of changing it shouldn't exist for a whole year, because if someone's gathering that, waiting to do something, and it never changes, you've exposed yourself that way. So a couple items here on the side: store them securely, memorize them, make sure it's not something that's easy to do. Don't answer those Facebook questions on what's your favorite superhero, what was your first car you drove, things like that that seem to be just trolling for additional information that they could use to help guess your passwords. So let's go to the third element of secure, the broader one of challenge and verify. The broader principle is challenge and verify, and this is in the physical realm as well as in the system realm. So if you bar entry, you block entry without some sort of challenge and response, you stop them at the door, you don't let them get to sensitive data or other locations. An example, you can walk around the office now when you see it. People are not at their desk, their computer is open. Is there a screensaver that is locked, or is it open? Is the computer open with no timeout until they log out for the day? Is it available? So screensaver with password locks that time out in 10, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is in your organization. Is that enforced? Somebody's on your team not doing it? That's a significant problem. So screensavers with password locks on a time basis is one principle. We saw that 4 and 5, 80%, 79% had that in place as a standard principle. Now we see that might be the standard principle, but sometimes there's an update to the computer and the person gets them up and running, and this is no longer installed there. So this is something that should be checked generally, but that's part of the broader principle of challenge and verify. Now, we can continue with that concept to look at a few more examples of that principle. So how do we apply that? So when you see out-of-band authentication in the upper left-hand section, this is, you don't use the same channel that may have been compromised to confirm the message. So if you received an email that says, hey, we got to send out this wire, you don't send it back and say, did you really mean to send that? If that email has been compromised, you've gone back and said the same thing. You wouldn't use the same channel if they say, hey, send this wire. If you need to verify it, call our auditors or call so-and-so. Here's the number for which to call them. Well, of course, they would put numbers that they control, digitally or forward or otherwise to make sure that that's the case. So how do you validate something using a different band, using a different channel than you receive the messages? So your due diligence effort in this is to make sure you're validating certain types of transfers if it's coming through a channel that's not particularly secure, like email. System request where there's multiple approvals enforced by the system are going to give you much greater level of comfort and not necessarily have to do out-of-band authentication for everything that comes that way, but others would require that. Now, on the physical network, ID and password would be required for access. Hopefully every company has that. Sometimes a third level of authentication is required, and that's usually excellent for people in finance, people in treasury, AP, and human resources. And certainly the system administrators should have that multi-factor authentication for if you're running the network, you're the network administrator. There was a big four consulting firm that their system administrators were not using multiple factors. They got breached, and they were able to gain the keys to the kingdom because they had access to that. Very, very significant. So physical network needs to be challenged and tested. So the idea of vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, which is usually the second step. The first step in a penetration test is where are the vulnerabilities? System patches haven't been put in place. You've got open ports. You have weak encryption, et cetera, is what the next step is when you do penetration testing, or when you're penetrated, people will approach those particular weaknesses, find the vulnerabilities, and then try to exploit them. So that is, those are some of the physical network. On the office, plant, wherever you are, it is perfectly fine to, in a pleasant way, winsomely, challenge people who are in an area that you don't know who they are. Locking doors, locking file cabinets, actually locking file cabinets, not saying, yeah, there's a lock on it, we just don't lock it. We're concerned we're going to lose the key, but making sure they're locked and confidential information is stored so that someone goes to retrieve it, they're challenged because they have to have a key. So physical access makes sense, and make sure you're challenging people who come in there. There's a lot of people who we tend to not even think of. They're watering plants. They got the little bag to repair copiers, et cetera. You're going to not even see them, but those are parts of the challenge and verify. Challenge and verify systems, challenge and verify requests, make sure the physical network and your office building is held inviolate by challenge and verify. So that's the first three of secure. The U in secure is update continuously. Stay current. Just like you need to update your mind, you need to update your computer system, you need to do all those. So your IT people should enforce that the server is updated with patches and fixed regularly, systematically, and that they have someone who follows that. But computers, antivirus should be maintained and enforced. You can't connect to the network until your antivirus is current. Your software is patched and fixed regularly. You're not on Windows 1. You're not on Microsoft Excel 0. You're using current modern software that is updated and has the most attention paid to updates and security. On the bottom right of the left-hand side, we see broader community, Swift IOCs. There's also messages and locations from the government standpoint and from security monitoring sites where IT may participate or you may participate. If there are hacks or attempts at your organization, that you share that information with others. You're updating that information continually. You're reading and seeing what's reported, so you're staying alert to what's occurring. What are the new attack vectors? What's occurring? How are they exploiting a weakness in the memory of our laptops? Ooh, that's a problem. All these chips have an issue. What do we need to do? How can we resolve those? Staying alert and updating those continuously is something your organization needs to do. at the broader level, and then Treasury should also be monitoring what's going on there. And people and employees, how is your staff being trained? Are they being trained regularly? And is there any testing on that? Testing for actual compliance? Maybe you have not spam training, but spear phishing emails are being sent in. You have training on phishing emails, trying to get you to click on something. You have training on it, and then you make sure your organization has some test phishing emails. Who clicked on them? You just had your training. You clicked on something that came from someone you didn't know. This is not good. Go take some more training. You should not be using that type of activity. But particularly for those in Treasury and those handling payments, having regular training on fraud, security incidences, situations that occurred, understanding the attack vectors and understanding what has occurred will help you respond more appropriately. So being systematic about it, having training, but also testing on those to ensure that that knowledge is captured and understood and then reviewed is important. So as we're continuing to move along, I want to do another poll question. So how often does your organization offer employee training on security? So this is a select all that apply. We offer online training. We have in-house, in-person. It's handled by a central office. It's in-house, in-person, handled by a branch. We send people to outside training conferences. We do training on an as-needed basis. We do not offer formal training. And that's already 6 questions. I was hoping that we could get a further breakdown of we offer online training for security, but only from an IT perspective. Don't open this email. Here's how don't plug things into your computer. You don't know what they are. All of those rudimentary, basic things that IT wants to make sure everyone's doing the minimum standard. I would love to see how many people have great training on a number of factors that Treasury would be concerned about, the different threat vectors, approaches, situations, vulnerabilities that exist because people are trying to steal money, trying to get you to send money, or steal your data. So that's going. It's going well. I'm going to keep answering. This is excellent. So I'm going to broadcast the results so we can see that someone's taking some type of online training. I'd love to see that breakout of what's just basic IT versus what's more involved. So a little over 70%, 7 and 10. In-house, in-person training by central office or a branch. Combining those two together, I don't know if that's fair or not, but that would be about 40%. We send people to outside training conferences, 17%, and hopefully those people are coming back and doing an in-service or relaying what they learned to the broader group so that a significant percentage gets passed on. And this is the second to last one. We do training on an as-needed basis. That is actually quite common. So about 40%. Something happens, we do training. Leave the door unlatched. Make sure it's locked because we had a problem. And then about 9% say we don't offer formal training. So only about 9% have no formal training. So there's some ad needed and don't offer formal training. So the lesser formality there of about almost 50%. Or I guess it's hard to say because you can answer multiple questions, but you can see those answers yourself. But update continuously involves the systems, your networks, your PCs. It involves your people to make sure they're trained. We're going to move that off the slide, off the screen that you can see off to the end and close that. Appreciate you answering those questions. So we're going to keep going and move on to number 5 of secure. We're now on readiness and response. So how is your organization able to be ready to prevent something, ready to respond to particular situations? So when we talk about the speed matters in the beginning, and speed of detecting something, speed of responding, those are all elements. And being ready means you have the right framework, you understand the different policy components with the principles, and your organization is ready to respond. So I'd ask a couple of questions. There's no way to answer it on the screen. But do you have, what do you do if there's a problem? When we think about ability to respond, what do you do? Do you know what to do? Who do you call? And is that information, who do you call and how do you escalate something, on your computer only, or is it available in paper form or some way you could get to if your computer was compromised? And if you're saying, well, I have a disaster recovery plan, be honest, you're answering to yourself, is that adequate to handle a cyber attack, a business email compromise, or someone is targeting your accounts and attempting all kinds of hacks? How do you respond to those? Do you have your banker names on there? Do you have the local law enforcement, FBI, your IT cybersecurity group or your security group there? What is necessary? So when you think about this, what do we do? Who do we call? Who do we notify? Is it defined? Who do we notify? How do we get the word out? How do we identify when we're stable? And then what are the restoration procedures? When something happens, you might call your banks and say, stop sending money out, put a block or a freeze on our accounts until we get this resolved. So how do you determine it's resolved? How do you make sure you're fine? And then you stand the systems back up, again, maybe at a more secure posture with an extra validation step until you're sure the criminals or the hackers are out of your system. And how do you resolve and restore things back to normalcy? So if you have an action plan book that describes different types of situations, what to do, who to call, you are well prepared. If it's sort of informal or you just have here's a single number to call, it's our IT hotline, you have quite a bit of work to do. So I would say a couple things. We took a survey about how people had a Treasury fraud and controls framework, where they were, and we saw, not sure exactly why, but we saw a little more informality, less formality in having a Treasury fraud and controls framework between 2016 and 2017. We had hoped it would be a greater level of formality and less informality. It could be the result of more people were saying, yeah, as we really got down to it, our formality was not as formal as it should have been. We had gaps. We've got to close those gaps. So we are in the middle of another survey. We'll see if that has changed over time. I'm hoping it does, and I'm hoping you guys, who seem to be leaders, are making a change in the industry to make it harder for criminals to steal from us. So, excellent. Now, everyone was waiting for the second E, or exact and specific accountability in secure. And this is the concept of who has access, who is doing a certain function, or who has done something. Where is there a specific audit trail? There's a specific accountability to accessing systems, files, data. So this is that concept of not only segregation of duties, but being very specific about it across all aspects. So the principle is exact and specific accountability, and then the practice or the application will depend on where you are and what your organization is doing. So when we think about specific accountability, do you control physical keys to the building? Key card access, are those shared regularly? Are people leaving them out on their desks? Who's monitoring that? Who is checking to make sure that someone's access card is not being used when they're not on payroll? They're leaving it with someone else. Another access point for exact and specific accountability, I would say, has to do with the concept of payment files. Now, it's one thing to say, there's data in your ERP or your treasury system. Those systems are usually quite well locked down. You're restricting access to drives from the system itself, so the system process controls it. But when you think about payment files, someone's creating a payment file out of one of the 5 AP systems or the 3 human resource systems, et cetera. They're creating a file that's getting placed on the network somewhere. Maybe IT has access to it. Maybe Treasury is locked out of it. Maybe AP is locked out of it. Maybe Human Resources is locked out of it. Who has access to it? Do you, as a Treasury professional, an AP professional, have the requirement to know who has access to that? I would say yes, you do have a requirement to know and to make sure that if someone has access to that drive, that could be that needs to be understood. Who has access to it? Is it a person? Is it a routine or a system job that can access that, but nobody else can? So a payment file can be placed somewhere, and then it's automatically going to be sent, or it's going to be sent based upon some other job. That payment file may have information that sends money to a particular account with somebody's name or a particular company name associated with it. But the instructions, the electronic instructions, are driven off of the account number. If someone changes the account number or changes the bank and account number, will your system stop it? That would be one aspect. But the second is, if there is any change, how would you know that there was a change? How do you ensure that nobody can access those files and make those changes? Change the bank number to mine. Maybe they're not changing amounts because that might get caught. But if they change the address of where the money is going to, the banking address, will that be stopped? Will that be prevented? And part of that has to do with specific accountability and access. So IT may lock everybody in Treasury out, but maybe 3 people have access to it. How do you know when someone else in IT has access to it, or so when someone other than an automated routine has accessed a system? That specific and exact accountability and management cuts across many, many areas. Adding new bank accounts, new signers. Think about all the different areas where exact and specific accountability and traceability and an audit trail can make a difference. So these are vital elements for making sure your area is secure. These are 6 of the key principles with a number of the applications that we talked about. The exact and specific accountability also extends in other areas. So if you look on the right-hand side from one of our surveys, for assigning responsibility to track fraud and stay current on fraud developments, responses to issues, etc. Where are we? Have we been very specific? The top response, 41% of organizations said it's a general responsibility to track fraud and stay current on developments. It's not delineated in formal job descriptions. Then about a quarter say, when needed, we will address fraud attempts and monitor development. So it's purely responsive, not proactive. Third is informally, we have selected people to monitor fraud instances or the news and stay current based upon an area or type of fraud. You're in charge of ACH fraud. You're in charge of card issues. You're in charge of business email compromise, whatever. 14%. 22% are just over 1 in 5 formally assigned roles and have a regular reporting cadence to the group. This means we're formally monitoring what fraud is going on. We're staying current on developments. We're making sure that the whole group is benefiting from their expertise and their understanding. So that is the beginning part of E for exact and specific accountability and management. Now, I would like, as we move into the next section, we're going to encourage you to join our Treasury Security LinkedIn group. We're going to copy that down into the chat box. It's up in the notes section. I would love for you to go click request to join. I'll make sure you get that approved today. That is one way we share information about Treasury security on that LinkedIn group. I invite you to click. If you have LinkedIn, I assume you do. Monitor that site. Don't type in your passwords, but just go ahead and join that group. We'll share more information there and look forward to additional dialogue on that. So go ahead and click on that even while you're in the webinar to stay more current. This will be one way of monitoring what goes on, and we'll share more information there, so I appreciate your attention there. So this session, final thoughts, speed matters, encryption and control of keys is vital, and this is encryption in many different forms, or blocking the ability to clearly see data, make them work for it. Challenge and verify from a system perspective and a physical perspective. Make sure your system has the controls built in. Verify. Don't trust, just verify. Make sure you're verifying things. And fourth is update continuously. This is your systems, your software, and your people. Make sure everyone, including you, are continuously learning what goes on. I don't have to tell you on this webinar. You came to a webinar on security, so you're obviously focused on that. We appreciate that. Thank you for your help on the industry and paying attention to this. So that is excellent. But there are a lot that aren't staying current on it, and the more you can encourage your team and others to do so, the more you'll help all of us. Readiness and response, particularly being ready to respond or ready to address potential threats or actual attacks in a formal way, in a quick way, will make a difference. And then exact and specific accountability and management of processes is vital. Think about files, data, processes, and key information that you can ensure that you would know who does what. There's an audit trail. There's specific accountability. Those are 6 of our 12 key security principles. The other ones, the clamps on the right side, control, dual controls, layers of security, awareness, understanding, testing, monitoring, privilege, the principle of least privilege, and secure removal and deletion of data are 6 other key principles, and there's obviously a number of applications in each of those areas as well. So thank you for listening to this section on the first 6 security principles. There's a lot more on those that we can cover in detail. We even have a whole training session as part of Secure Treasury that goes through those in substantial depth. But what are the key takeaways for Treasury? I said at the beginning, fraud is massive. It's significant. They're making a lot of money. It's well worth it for them. Criminals are adapting, and they're using technology against you. They're not just attacking you one-on-one, getting one person to sell their paycheck that they can forge and make copies of. They're using systems to monitor people, target companies. They're very patient. They're moving forward, and they're leveraging technology so they can do it much more repeatedly. So we need to up our game, and that means being proactive and strengthening our defenses against fraud. One key way to do that is educate your employees on a systematic basis, not just on phishing emails, why don't stick a thumb drive you don't know where it's from in your computer, that kind of thing, but also make sure you understand and your employees and your peers understand the different attack vectors that people are using, different approaches, dissect existing frauds. What went wrong? What can be done? Are you prepared for that? Be intentional about that. Be specific and exact way who's responsible for managing the defenses in your organization in each area, IT, Treasury, AP, and how do we do that? And stay aware of threats, and do not underestimate fraud. Anytime you find yourself saying, oh, that couldn't happen to us, that usually means you're not looking as carefully as you should. You do want to make sure it's harder for someone to attack you than for others. That brings us right to the end, and this is the final pitch for you to take our live survey. We have it at strategictreasury.com. This is our 3rd year of Treasury Fraud and Controls. Please take that survey. And why should you take it? 1, you sharing information will help the industry overall. That's the altruistic method and the purpose. The other is that you taking that survey means you will get a much more complete report, about twice as much data. We'll have a lot more data that we share with those who complete the survey. Yes, it takes time. It might take 20, 25 minutes, sometimes 30 if you're interrupted with other work or calls, but it is well worth taking the complete survey, and you'll get information not only in a webinar that'll take an hour, but you'll also get a more complete report if you complete that. So please do take that. Your information is kept confidential, and you get a significant amount of information. There's other opportunities as well to help. So thank you for taking surveys. Please go do that. Sign up. Go take that survey. And I will appreciate it, and you'll appreciate the extra information. We also have a detailed training course that we continue to add to. It's an online video course with testing. Whether you are complying with SWIFT CSP and following their requirements, or you're doing something with PCI, or you just want to make sure people are kept current. We offer a lot of courses that are geared to making sure people understand what's going on and how they can do it. So thank you for participating in the event. Thank you for joining the LinkedIn group. I'm going to see if there are any questions in the box. I know we're right about at the hour, and I'll answer any questions that we have over the next few minutes. So thank you, everyone, for joining, participating, giving up some of your time, and being part of the battle against crime and fraud. So let's give it a few more moments. With that, I think we're at the top of the hour. I don't see questions coming in, but if they do come in, I will answer them. Again, thank you for your time.